Other than a sport, baseball is mostly three things: a media franchise, a bunch of statistics, and a bunch of anecdotes. And these three worlds don't always intersect the way we want them to. It's inconvenient to the story of the Chicago Black Sox, for example, that shoeless Joe Jackson hit for a .956 OPS and led the team in win probability added for the 1919 World Series, the one they supposedly threw. So if you're telling that story like a credulous old book, you got to ignore part of the reality. Here's the cast of Moneyball, and here's why the 2002 A's won 103 games. Despite being the very best in the league, their starting rotation was completely absent from the movie. But there's one classic baseball story where statistics serve as a perfect backdrop, a suspiciously perfect backdrop, and yet they're rarely mentioned. Look, it's Ted Turner, an advertising and media mogul who bought the Braves in 1976 and immediately entrenched himself in baseball lore. Anything big and historic? Oh, just signing the first free agent in MLB history to a huge deal. Anything controversial? Well, the free agent he signed was pitcher Andy Messersmith, who every other owner hated and wanted out of the game forever, since he successfully challenged the "you can only leave this team if we say you can" system, euphemistically called the reserve clause system. The only other free agent that offseason, a pretty good pitcher named Dave McNally, never played again due to owners' collusion. And Curt Flood, less than a decade earlier, sacrificed his borderline Hall of Fame career in its prime to unsuccessfully challenge this system. So Turner signing Messersmith was a shocking move. Once Turner signed him, he changed his uniform number from 47 to 17 as free advertising for Turner's own Channel 17. And in case you don't believe this, when Turner introduced nicknames on jerseys for 28 home games in 1976, he called Messersmith Channel 17. Later changed to Bluto after the commissioner objected. Ever heard of Howdy, Heavy, Chopper, and Taco? Oh, that's just the Braves lineup. Darrell Evans, Earl Williams, Dave May, and Marty Perez. Turner was ahead of his time with the nicknames. And when he considered changing the Braves' name to the Eagles to avoid offending Native Americans, and when he installed a new video board at Atlanta Fulton County Stadium specifically and unequivocally for showing replays of close calls against the Braves, and when he said this quote, which if you're an eccentric oligarch watching this video, you may want to adopt as well. But he also did one of the most old-timey things an owner can do, shy of bringing back segregation. He made himself the manager. Yes, on May 10, 1977, his Braves had lost their 16th game in a row, and that evening Turner summoned manager Dave Bristol to his hotel room. He didn't fire him, which is what Bristol expected. Instead, Turner told Bristol, "Take a vacation. I can manage the Braves." And Bristol's response was, quote, "You're crazy, but go ahead. It's your team," end quote. Now, in the olden days, owners did sometimes manage, most recently Connie Mack in 1950, but Connie Mack also rode horses and smoked pipes. This is 1977. Bill James' baseball abstracts being written. People generally know better. But here comes Ted into the locker room, in uniform, with backward stirrups and a fat cigar between his lips. And there goes Johnny Sane, the pitching coach, looking for Dave Bristol as the game's about to start. Nobody told him Bristol had been sentenced to vacation.
Top of the Atlanta dugout, where Ted Turner was just dancing.
To quote the Braves' PR director at the time, quote, "We knew the team wouldn't be very good, but we also didn't have any money to spend on promotions, so we had to do things that generated publicity. We would say, it's better to go down the street as a village idiot and be noticed than to not be noticed at all. We would do things that would stir up harmless controversy and get in the news, but didn't really hurt anyone," end quote. So the same mindset that led Bill Veeck to put a little person wearing uniform number 1/8 in a game for the 51 Browns. Ted Turner's daily gimmicks would have made Veeck proud, like ostrich races, or wedlock and headlock day when 34 couples got married in a pregame ceremony and 2 pro wrestlers squared off in a postgame fight. But there was an important difference. This wasn't the Browns. This was a proud franchise. They had Henry Aaron 4 years ago and still had a few household names. How bad could they be? Sure, the 77 Braves had the most losses and highest ERA in the league, but they weren't really a pitching team. How about their lineup? Why don't we go to Baseball Reference and sort every team's position players by Total WAR, and we'll see who's the worst position player group in history by Total WAR. Oh no! That's actually surprising, though. The literal worst ever, the 77 Braves, the worst ever, the worst position player group in baseball history. You'd think we know about that. It's you'd think that'd be part of the Ted Turner story, you know? It's just,
Boy, good wood on that one. Solomon got that ball. Oh, Office bobbled that ball, not alertly. He's going to get an extra base. That should be a single and an E8. It is.
That's 8 unearned runs in this inning.
Yeah, that's far too many errors for both clubs. Better than an error per game.
The 77 Braves are the only -10 WAR group of position players in Major League history. The Federal League, the Union Association, the Negro Leagues, the wartime years, no team had a lineup as bad. Even the 1899 Spiders, the consensus pick as the worst team ever, and more importantly, Foolish Baseball's pick as the worst team ever, weren't half as bad. There are only 4 teams in the past quarter century whose position players combined for a negative WAR. Not a -10 WAR, a negative WAR, and I'll tell you who they are after word from this video's sponsor. I'm just kidding, my channel's too small to have a sponsor. Here are those 4 teams. The Braves did this all 3 years after Henry Aaron left. Their 75 and 76 lineups were in the red as well. But how did they let it get this bad? I mean, -10 WAR for a lineup is insane. Well, my theory is they didn't realize just how much they sucked. The stats aren't great, but if you don't adjust them for park value and factor in modern defensive metrics, they just look regular bad, not historically bad. The Braves played at the launching pad, Atlanta Fulton County Stadium, which was built for Henry Aaron, just as Yankee Stadium was built for the Babe. It was the most hitter-friendly park in the majors, and the highest altitude field prior to Coors, with similar park factors to boot. Here's their 1977 offense adjusted to a neutral park in 2022.
0-1 coming. Hit high and deep to right field, folks. It's going to be a 17-9 ball game.
An average pitcher on the 77 Braves would allow over 6 runs per 9 innings, more than a run and a half over the league average. Let's compare that to 2000, the most hitter-friendly season in modern baseball. An average pitcher would give up more runs on the 1977 Braves than the 2000 Rockies, the quintessential hitter-friendly environment.
Here's the line by Whitson in the pitch. Fly ball, deep left field. Bill Robinson looks up. Grand slam home run for Gary Matthews. Gary Matthews has cleared the bases of the grand slam, and the Braves lead it 9-7.
Their defense cost them 0.86 runs per 9 innings, over 6 runs every week. That's the biggest negative adjustment for any team in MLB history since 1890, apart from a few Negro League teams with small sample sizes who played short schedules and have sketchy rate stats. It's how the Braves pitchers managed over 20 WAR with an ERA plus of just 92, another unique achievement. One reason for this is the shoddy field conditions. Even though their stadium was also used for football, they didn't have full-time groundskeepers until the 80s. It was looked after by the city.
You cannot nonchalant a ball on this field. As we explained last night, it's in rough shape in the outfield, and if you lay back on a ball, it gives it that chance to take the extra hop, which could be a bad one.
Well, and look how torn up it is around first base. This infield is almost a quagmire. He might have not That's a strike, and it's 1-1. The footing might not have enabled him to get a good jump.
I tell you, the infield is so bad here that our infielders won't even take infield practice or practice balls during batting practice because they're afraid it's going to come up and hit them in the face.
Let's look at Phil Niekro. He's an inner circle Hall of Famer and very consistent year to year with his knuckleballing style, and not exactly a small sample size kind of guy. Not only is his ERA an outlier in 77, so are his strikeouts per 9 and walks per 9. And you know what would make both of these increase? If his fielders made fewer outs in the field. He has to do more himself, more walks, more strikeouts. Their league-high ERA pitching staff looks awful, but was actually excellent. Their top 3 of Knucksy Niekro, Rufus Ruthven, and Channel 17 were legitimately good pitchers who pitched very well under such brutal conditions. And still, their difference of 1.05 runs per 9 scored versus what the opponent scored per 9 innings is the worst since the 62 Mets and the worst until the 1993 Rockies. That's how you know their offense was trash as well. It's no surprise their fielding runs for the year were -138, the second worst ever to the 1974 Cubs, same as defensive WAR. But look at their batting runs, -171. The 77 Braves are one of the 10 worst hitting teams since 1960. In all of Major League history, from Tungsten Arm O'Doyle to Lars Nootbaar, only 37 offenses were worse. Their bright spots, they did have a few, were Gary Matthews in left field, Jeff Burroughs in right field, and their catchers led by Biff Poco Pocoroba. Burroughs and Matthews were their big acquisitions the previous offseason. If you know 2000s baseball like I do, you may remember their son, Sean Burroughs of the Padres, or Gary Matthews Jr. of the Rangers and kind of Angels. The elder Burroughs, the 74 MVP and a former first overall draft pick, came from the Rangers in a trade after the 76 season. He was a big, lumbering slugger in the Jay Bruce mold.
Psychic said that Burroughs is going to hit 50 homers this year. Got 49 to go.
Good power, but really should have been a DH, posting a minus 3.4 defensive WAR in 1977 and costing the Braves a whopping 26 runs with his field.
2 of Necro's runs were unearned, so those Braves errors do hurt. That's 3 of the 11 runs, and without those 3, the Braves would have a 1-run lead right now.
He hit 40 homers, but then again, so did 3 players on the 1973 Braves, Darrell Evans, 39-year-old Henry Aaron, and noted launching pad enthusiast, former slap hitter Davey Johnson. Matthews was a free agent replacing Jim Wynn, who was sold to the Yankees. Matthews was more of an all-around player, comparable to Adam Jones. Matthews was their big free agent acquisition for 77, and of course he was signed in a controversial manner. Turner told the Giants owner specific financial info on Matthews while he was still a Giant, and Commissioner Bowie Kuhn suspended him for this, but the suspension was successfully appealed. Turner's excuse? Oh, come on, I was drunk. Great appeal. That will work for anybody.
Phil, what is that? We wanted you to put it in a college fund because you got all those children to go to college, but if you want to spend it on a new Cadillac, you can do that too.
The Braves lost 2-1 to the Pirates on May 11th, 1977, the only game Ted Turner managed before being banned from managing by National League President Chub Feeney the next morning. Chub Feeney. Chub Feeney cited a rule in which anybody who had a financial interest in a team required special approval from the commissioner to play or manage for that team. Commissioner Bowie Kuhn didn't approve, saying, quote, "Given Mr. Turner's lack of familiarity with game operations, I do not think it's in the best interest of baseball to serve in the requested capacity," end quote. Kuhn even barred him from managing in the minors so he could learn the ropes. A spiteful Turner had the PA announcer read Kuhn's statement before the start of their next home game, and the crowd booed. Ted may have had his haters, but one look at the Braves' attendance year to year and you could see how popular he was. Attendance rose sharply when he took over in 76, and it rose again in 77, even after the team hit rock bottom. The players agreed with the fans. Turner was in the right. "I respect him for it," said Phil Necro, "and I think everybody else on the club does." According to Andy Messersmith, quote, "Ted's the best owner in baseball, and the other owners are trying to blackball him from the game. They're loving this nosedive we're in because they can say, 'See, you can't have fun playing baseball. You can't be loose. You can't be interested in the fans and the players before the profits,'" end quote. Sounds like the kind of guy who'd end the reserve clause system to me, players before the profits. Anyway, quote, "I think it was a good idea," said second baseman Rod Gilbreth, more on him later. "He loosened everybody up when he told us about it in the clubhouse." After all, Turner didn't take over because he thought he could do a better job. It was about motivation. Quote, "I figured if I could just get down in the dugout with some authority, I might find out what was wrong," end quote, he said. The Braves just lost 74 Cy Young Award winner Mike Marshall a few days earlier, and it wasn't due to injury. Marshall was struggling on the mound, and when Bristol walked out to remove him, Marshall bowled the ball to second base instead of giving it to his manager, threw a bat onto the field from the dugout, and then abandoned the team. Ted Turner kept it loose and had fun down in the clubhouse. Infielder Darrell Nort Cheney noted that Turner would cross his legs every time the Pirates manager crossed his legs. He let Phil Necro, who pitched a complete game that day, bat wherever he wanted in the lineup, and Necro only wound up batting ninth on his own insistence. Turner later defended his managing to the media, saying, "The only stupid thing I did was buy the franchise." He was later quoted as saying, "I want to manage even more now, because they don't want me to. Everybody in baseball takes all this so seriously. This is just like a big Little League team to me." And I couldn't put it better myself. The 3 worst position players in baseball in 1977 were on the Braves. No other team has ever had 3 players this bad at the same time. Them and the 10th worst position player combined for minus 10.7 wins above replacement. At shortstop was Pat Rocket, a former first-round draft pick who was rushed to the majors before he was ready. Rocket was the 1977 opening day starter and proved a butcher in the field, and then cratered in 1978 with an OPS of just .366, leaving one of the saddest career stat lines I've seen, especially when you remember that his fielding was twice as bad as his hitting.
2 more unearned runs because it would have been a 1-2-3 inning without the error.
I thought that's what he said. Maybe I'm wrong, and they haven't put it on the board. I thought he said hit and error.
No, I think he said error 6. So that means a 2-base error has Necro in trouble.
In center field was another prospect rushed to the majors, Roland Office.
Office has been one of those players that always looked like he was going to blossom, but never did to the potential that I'm sure they hoped.
He set a career high in at-bats in 77, but lost his only decent tool, his ability to make contact, and his OPS fell below 600 despite a hitting environment comparable to Coors Field. His most similar player, per Baseball Reference, is Juan Lagares, but unlike Lagares, he was a defensive liability.
Now the 1-0 pitch. Inside again, and here we go again, folks. Office heads to the mound. This time we may have some trouble. Office out there, the Pirates are saying, which one of us do you want?
But the engine of the Braves train wreck was Jerry J. Bird Royster, who took over the third base job in 76 after the Braves traded star slugger Darrell Evans. Royster didn't hit much, but he stole bases and played good defense, which was enough for most teams in the 70s. But in 1977, the Braves tried moving him to shortstop. Take a look at the range factors for 40-year-old Derek Jeter, compared with the league. And now take a look at Royster's range factors per position. Notice that he was a plus defender in 76 when he stuck to third base. In 77, he was at least as bad a shortstop as 40-year-old Derek Jeter. And his batting? Well, here's his 1977 stat line. See the OPS plus of 46? Now, here are Chris Davis's stats from the twilight Armageddon of his career. Royster was like 40-year-old Jeter in the field and like zombie Chris Davis at the plate. And if you're saying, hey, that sounds like the worst season ever, congratulations, my friend, that's exactly what it is. And also congratulations to you, dear listener, for having the same OPS plus as Pat Rocket in 1978.
Again here. There's the funny hop for Royster. There's the third bounce, just a fraction of an inch too far away from Mike. He had it in the glove when it bounced away. Runners wind up on the corner.
The error will be on the throw by Royster. Error number 3 of the night for Atlanta.
These Braves are fun, huh? The 77 Braves were the worst of the majors at every infield position. No other team in baseball history has ever been the worst at all 4 infield positions. And only one team since 77 Braves has been the worst at 3 out of 4, the 05 Royals. They were the only team in history to have 4 players with -2 defensive WAR. It is pretty safe to say the worst lineup in MLB history is on the 77 Braves. So did Ted Turner manage the worst lineup ever? Yeah, I guess, kinda. But what is the actual single worst lineup? Well, they had the same lineup for the first 18 games, with their catching platoon hitting number 6, Vic Bird Dog Carell, and the selectively handsome Biff Benedict Pocoroba, which, interestingly, only 4 players since 1950 have had the name Benedict, 2 guys who played in only a handful of games, and 2 catchers who played in 10 or more seasons exclusively with the Braves and exclusively in the 70s and 80s, Biff Benedict Pocoroba and Bruce Benedict. Anyway, the worst lineup ever was probably when Gary Matthews, the Braves' best position player, was injured and missed 2 weeks early in the season, from April to early May, being replaced by a guy whose official nickname was Wimpy. Matthews played every game in 77 except this stretch and 3 games in summer, and in those summer games, Royster and Rocket didn't play, so the worst lineup in history wouldn't be those games. Now, Ted Turner managed on May 11th, which is in the no Matthews window of time, which begs the question, was Turner's lineup the worst? Well, not quite. Ted Turner's lineup had a WAR of -6.1 for the year, not the worst ever, but pretty close. And with 1976 sack bunt leader Rod Gilbreth batting second, a 2-1 loss to a strong Pirates team was not half bad. They certainly covered the spread. The worst lineup ever, based on full year WAR, as we've been doing, was on April 30th, 1977 versus the Cardinals, who featured 2 Hall of Fame ballplayers and 1 Hall of Fame boxer. The Braves position players you see here combined for a minus 11.5 wins above replacement in 1977. The Braves, true to form, made 5 errors and lost. Pat Rocket made 2 errors and got caught stealing home. Andy Messersmith lasted just 3 innings before re-injuring his left side, probably an oblique strain. A worse lineup than this, if you can imagine, would require Rocket, Royster, Office, and Gilbreth all to start, without Matthews or Pocoroba starting, and no such lineup exists. The one Brave here I have neglected to mention was the charismatic, bat-flipping Willie Montañez, whose calling in life was to be the most popular player on as many awful 70s teams as possible. He was a Rule 5 draft pick, the player to be named later in the Phillies' failed attempt to sign Curt Flood, then trade for Gary Maddox, then trade for Darrell Evans, then in a 4-team trade with Bert Blyleven, then in 4 more trades, and he retired with a 1.6 WAR and 0 playoff appearances after all those good 1-for-1 trades with star players. Something else. Kind of a Jeff Francoeur career. He was the Braves' only All-Star in 77 despite a negative WAR that year. Because of course he was. I know, his stats don't look bad, but remember, this is like Coors Field. When Ian Desmond and Daniel Murphy played first base for the Rockies, their stats looked okay in a vacuum as well, but we know better. So if we include the pitcher, the worst lineup on this team was the 3 games in April that Frank LaCourte started. LaCourte was the least effective pitcher in the entire league in 77, and among the least effective pitchers in MLB history. These lineups, including him, combined for a wins above replacement of minus 10.9 on the year. If you include the pitcher, the Messersmith lineup against the Cardinals is not as bad as these. It is remarkable how top-heavy this team was. Their June 22nd lineup, excluding Burrows, had a negative 7.6 WAR, not for 77, but for their career. And all you have to do is take out Jeff Burrows. Their September 2nd lineup, all you do is take out Gary Matthews, negative 10.6 wins above replacement for the career of these guys. That's 7 people. They let this guy start a bunch of games. They let this guy start a bunch of games, en route to a 101-loss season, which could have been worse, including a 17-game losing streak, which finally ended the day Turner was banned, the only day third base coach Vern Benson ever managed before Dave Bristol returned. So, the chronological low point on this team, with the worst lineup in Major League history, the 17th loss in a row, was the game that Ted Turner managed. He managed the game that was the low point on the team with the worst lineup in baseball history. Seems pretty important. Am I the first to point this out? Probably not. There's lots of nerds who go on Baseball Reference more than I do. But that's pretty interesting. It's the last game ever managed by an owner, and it has that, you can say. Anyway, the following season, the Braves signed Bobby Cox as manager and introduced rookie star Dale Murphy into their starting lineup. And 2 years after that, they were a winning team. And 2 decades after that, they were a dynasty, bringing a World Series home to the same launching pad where an ostrich once pulled the owner in a cart. That's a happy ending. Well, this isn't, though. I'll end with this clip, the only footage I can find of the 77 Braves offense. The other clips in this video are all from 79. Sorry. This shows Burrows striking out and Cheney hitting into a double play because, of course it does. Thanks to Classic MLB 1, Tim McCartney, and Forever Expos for the video clips. See description for more on all that. And thank you for watching.